5 true haunted house stories that will freak you out story. 1. The house on Willow Street. The night was still, and the air was thick with an eerie silence. The house stood tall against the dark sky, its windows boarded up, the roof sagging with age. Inside, Sarah was unpacking boxes, attempting to make her new home feel like a place of comfort. But there was something in the air, something she couldn't quite explain. The walls seemed to whisper, and the floors creaked in strange, rhythmic patterns. She paused for a moment, listening to the unsettling noise coming from the hallway, but she shook it off. It was just an old house, she told herself. Old houses made strange noises, right? Sarah had moved into the house with her husband Tom. They had decided to leave the city and settle in a quiet town, away from the hustle and bustle. The house, a Victorian relic on the outskirts of town, was exactly what they had been looking for. But from the moment they stepped inside, Sarah felt something was wrong. It wasn't the kind of feeling that could be explained by a draft or a loose floorboard. It was an unshakable sense of being watched, a weight in the air that seemed to hang around her like a shadow. She couldn't quite place it, but it was there, everywhere. That night, Sarah was in bed, tossing and turning, unable to sleep. The room was freezing, though the heater had been on all evening. A sudden thud from the hallway echoed through the house, sending a chill down her spine. She sat up, her breath visible in the icy air. The thud was followed by a creak, like someone walking up the stairs. She held her breath, straining to listen, but the house was quiet again. Tom, asleep beside her, didn't stir. She tried to calm herself, rationalize the noises as just the house settling. But deep down, she knew something was wrong, and that feeling only grew stronger as the days passed. The first signs of the supernatural came the following week. It started small. Objects moved on their own. A book, left on the kitchen table, would be found across the room. A glass, set carefully on the counter, would be shattered on the floor by the time Sarah returned. Each time, she convinced herself it was just her imagination, that she was just tired or overthinking. But as the occurrences became more frequent, she couldn't deny the truth anymore. Something was happening, something she couldn't explain. One night, Sarah woke up from a nightmare. The dream had been vivid, far too real. She had dreamt of a dark figure standing at the foot of her bed. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity, and its hollow gaze seemed to pierce her very soul. The figure moved closer in the dream, reaching out to her, its cold fingers brushing her skin. She woke up gasping, her heart racing, only to find herself alone in the dark room. But when she looked around, she saw something that froze her blood. The figure from her dream, standing in the corner of the room, watching her. She blinked, and it was gone, but the fear lingered, clawing at her mind. Had she seen it? Or was it just a trick of the mind? She didn't know, but it felt too real. Desperate for answers, Sarah began to research the history of the house. She visited the town's library, combing through old town records and historical documents. That's when she found it, a dark history buried beneath the house's foundations. The house had been built over the remains of an old mansion, destroyed in a fire that claimed the lives of its inhabitants. But it wasn't the fire that had killed them. No, it was something darker. Whispers of an occult ritual, a curse placed on the house by the very people who built it, a curse that bound a malevolent spirit to the property, ensuring that no one could escape its wrath. The more Sarah uncovered, the more the supernatural activity escalated. It wasn't just strange noises anymore. There were whispers, shadowy, figures darting across the walls, and the temperature in the house would drop to freezing at odd times. Sarah's mind began to unravel. She couldn't tell if she was losing her sanity or if the house was truly alive with something otherworldly. It was then that Sarah turned to her old friend Emily for help. Emily had always been a source of comfort, someone who would understand. But when Sarah confided in her, Emily's reaction wasn't what she expected. Emily's face grew pale, her eyes darting nervously as she spoke. "Sarah," Emily said softly, "I need to tell you something. I'm not just a friend to you. I'm related to the original owners of that house, the ones who built it. I've known about the curse, but I never wanted you to find out. The house, it's tied to my bloodline, and it's been waiting for you." Sarah's heart sank as the weight of Emily's words crashed down on her. The betrayal was too much to bear. The one person she had trusted had kept a dark secret, a secret that now bound her to the very horror she was trying to escape. But there was no time to process the betrayal. The entity, the malevolent spirit that had haunted the house for generations, was growing more powerful. It was no longer content to remain in the shadows. It was here, in the flesh, and it wanted Sarah. One night, the entity revealed itself in full force. The house grew cold, the air thick with an oppressive presence. The walls trembled, and Sarah could hear the sound of footsteps, footsteps that weren't hers. The figure from her dreams appeared, standing at the foot of her bed once again, its eyes burning with rage. Sarah backed away in terror, but the figure followed, its movements unnatural, predatory. It spoke, its voice a low growl. "You shouldn't have come here. Now you belong to me." With nowhere to run, Sarah fought back. She tried to recall everything she had learned about the house's history, the rituals, the curse, hoping to find a way to break the entity's hold. But the spirit wasn't going to let her go so easily. It was angry, vengeful, and determined to claim her as its own. The final confrontation was a blur of terror. Sarah, exhausted and broken, faced the entity head-on, screaming for help. But there was no one to save her. The house seemed to close in around her, its walls pressing against her. The entity reached out, its cold hands grasping for her throat, and just as she thought it would be the end, everything stopped. Silence. Sarah was left alone in the room. The entity vanquished, but the house was far from free. She had survived, but at what cost? Her mind was shattered, her body exhausted, and her heart heavy with the weight of everything she had experienced. She left the house, but the horror followed her, lingering in her thoughts, in her dreams. The town was forever changed. The once beautiful house stood abandoned, its windows dark and lifeless. No one dared to enter it again, and as Sarah walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that the entity hadn't truly been defeated. It was still there, waiting for its next victim. The horror was never truly over. It never would be. Sometimes the greatest terror isn't what you can see. It's what lies beneath the surface, hidden in the shadows, waiting for someone to uncover it. And once you've seen it, it will never let you go. Story 2. The Cursed Mansion. In Thornhill, in the heart of Thornhill, stood a grand mansion, once a home to a wealthy family, now a decaying monument to tragedy. The mansion had been empty for years, but rumors persisted, whispers of a curse that haunted its halls. The story began when Emma and her friends decided to investigate the mansion, seeking thrills and a story to tell. As they wandered through the mansion, exploring the dusty rooms and broken furniture, they stumbled upon an old diary hidden beneath the floorboards. The diary detailed the tragic tale of the mansion's original owners, the Greys. The family had been cursed after making a deal with a dark entity for wealth and power. The curse had taken everything from them, including their lives. It didn't take long for the group to realize that the curse wasn't just a story. The atmosphere of the mansion grew suffocating, and strange occurrences began happening. Shadows moving on their own, doors slamming shut, and chilling whispers that echoed through the halls. Emma and her friends found themselves trapped in a battle with the restless spirits of the Grey family, struggling to survive the wrath of an ancient curse. Story 3. The Abandoned Hotel. In a small town stood an abandoned hotel, a once popular getaway that had been shut down after a series of mysterious deaths. The hotel was said to be haunted by the spirits of those who had died under strange circumstances. People would hear ghostly laughter, footsteps in the halls, and see flickering lights in the windows, even though the hotel was supposed to be empty. One curious soul, Jack, decided to spend the night in the hotel, hoping to uncover the truth behind the stories. He checked into room 207, the most infamous room of the hotel, where several people had vanished without a trace. As the night wore on, Jack began experiencing strange things. He heard whispers, saw flickering shadows in the corners of the room, and felt a cold presence watching him. By the time morning came, Jack was no longer the same. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror, and he could hardly remember what had happened during the night. But as he left the hotel, he noticed something horrifying. The building was no longer abandoned. People were checking in, and the cycle of torment was about to begin again. Story 4. The haunted farmhouse. In the countryside stood an old farmhouse, abandoned for decades. No one dared to go near it, not after what had happened there years ago. The farm had once belonged to a kind couple, but their lives were cut short when a strange disease swept through the area. After their deaths, the farmhouse was left empty, and the land was believed to be cursed. Rachel, a young woman intrigued by the mystery, decided to spend a weekend at the farmhouse. She had heard the stories, but she didn't believe in ghosts. As she settled in, the house began to feel colder, and the walls creaked with sounds that didn't make sense. At night, she heard scratching noises from the attic, and something, or someone, would tap at her window. Rachel soon discovered the truth. The couple's spirits had never left. They were trapped in the house, unable to rest. And as Rachel tried to leave, she found herself trapped in a nightmare, with the spirits of the past reaching out to claim her. Story 5. The Mansion on Maple Hill. The mansion on Maple Hill had been abandoned for years, yet it still stood, its dark windows staring down at the town below. The house had been the site of a horrific murder spree that left a family dead, their bodies found in the most brutal of ways. The mansion was said to be haunted by the spirits of the murdered family, their vengeful souls seeking justice. Despite the warnings, a group of thrill-seeking teens decided to spend the night in the mansion, eager to capture footage of the supernatural. They found the house eerie, with its cracked mirrors and cold, oppressive atmosphere, but nothing could have prepared them for the horrors that awaited. As the night unfolded, the teens encountered the restless spirits of the family, who were trapped in a loop of violence and death. One by one, the spirits claimed their victims, and the teens found themselves fighting for their lives against an enemy they couldn't see or touch, but could certainly feel. By morning, only one teen remained. They ran from the mansion, but the trauma they experienced would haunt them forever. The mansion on Maple Hill stood, waiting for its next visitors. These stories aren't just tales, they're warnings. The spirits, curses, and supernatural forces lurking in these haunted houses are real, and they're waiting for someone to uncover their dark secrets. Once you step into their world, there's no turning back.